Chapter 2, Part 2 of Queen Victoria. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Queen Victoria by Giles Lytton Strachey. Chapter 2, Part 2. 4. King William could not away with his sister-in-law, and the Duchess fully returned his antipathy. Without considerable tact and considerable forbearance, their relative positions were well calculated to cause ill-feeling, and there was very little tact in the composition of the Duchess, and no forbearance at all in that of His Majesty. A bursting, bubbling old gentleman, with quarter-deck gestures, round-rolling eyes, and a head like a pineapple, his sudden elevation to the throne, after 56 years of utter insignificance, had almost sent him crazy. His natural exuberance completely got the best of him. He rushed about, doing preposterous things in an extraordinary manner, spreading amusement and terror in every direction, and talking all the time. His tongue was decidedly Hanoverian, with its repetitions, its catchwords. "That's quite another thing. That's quite another thing," its rattling indomitability, its loud indiscreetness. His speeches, made repeatedly at the most inopportune junctures, and filled pell-mell with all the fancies and furies that happened at the moment to be whisking about in his head, were the consternation of ministers. He was 1 part blackguard, people said, and 3 parts buffoon. But those who knew him better could not help liking him. He meant well, and he was really good-humoured and kind-hearted, if you took him the right way. If you took him the wrong way, however, you must look out for squalls, as the Duchess of Kent discovered. She had no notion of how to deal with him, could not understand him in the least. Occupied with her own position, her own responsibilities, her duty and her daughter, she had no attention to spare for the peppery susceptibilities of a foolish, disreputable old man. She was the mother of the heiress of England, and it was for him to recognise the fact, to put her at once on a proper footing, to give her the precedence of a Dowager Princess of Wales with a large annuity from the privy purse. It did not occur to her that such pretensions might be galling to a king who had no legitimate child of his own, and who yet had not altogether abandoned the hope of having one. She pressed on with bulky vigour along the course she had laid out. Sir John Conroy, an Irishman with no judgment and a great deal of self-importance, was her intimate counsellor, and egged her on. It was advisable that Victoria should become acquainted with the various districts of England, and through several summers a succession of tours, in the West, in the Midlands, in Wales, were arranged for her. The intention of the plan was excellent, but its execution was unfortunate. The journeys, advertised in the press, attracting enthusiastic crowds and involving official receptions, took on the air of royal progresses. Addresses were presented by loyal citizens. The delighted Duchess, swelling in sweeping feathers and almost obliterating the diminutive Princess, read aloud in her German accent gracious replies prepared beforehand by Sir John, who, bustling and ridiculous, seemed to be mingling the roles of major domo and Prime Minister. Naturally the King fumed over his newspaper at Windsor. "That woman is a nuisance!" he exclaimed. Poor Queen Adelaide, amiable though disappointed, did her best to smooth things down, changed the subject, and wrote affectionate letters to Victoria. But it was useless. News arrived that the Duchess of Kent, sailing in the Solent, had insisted that whenever her yacht appeared it should be received by royal salutes from all the men of war and all the forts. The King declared that these continual poppings must cease. The Premier and the First Lord of the Admiralty were consulted, and they wrote privately to the Duchess, begging her to waive her rights. But she would not hear of it. Sir John Conroy was adamant. "As Her Royal Highness's confidential adviser," he said, "I cannot recommend her to give way on this point." Eventually the King, in a great state of excitement, issued a special order in council, prohibiting the firing of royal salutes to any ships except those which carried the reigning sovereign or his consort on board. When King William quarrelled with his Whig ministers, the situation grew still more embittered, for now the Duchess, in addition to her other shortcomings, was the political partisan of his enemies. In 1836 he made an attempt to prepare the ground for a match between the Princess Victoria and one of the sons of the Prince of Orange, and at the same time did his best to prevent the visit of the young Coburg princes to Kensington. He failed in both these objects, and the only result of his efforts was to raise the anger of the King of the Belgians, who, forgetting for a moment his royal reserve, addressed an indignant letter on the subject to his niece. "I am really astonished," he wrote, "at the conduct of your old uncle the King. This invitation of the Prince of Orange and his sons, this forcing him on others, is very extraordinary. Not later than yesterday I got a half-official communication from England insinuating that it would be highly desirable that the visit of your relatives should not take place this year. Qu'en dites-vous? The relations of the Queen and King, therefore, to the God knows what degree, are to come in shoals and rule the land, when your relations are to be forbidden the country, and that when, as you know, the whole of your relations have ever been very dutiful and kind to the King. Really and truly, I never heard or saw anything like it, and I hope it will a little rouse your spirit. Now that slavery is even abolished in the British colonies, I do not comprehend why your lot alone should be to be kept a white little slavey in England, for the pleasure of the Court, who never bought you, as I am not aware of their ever having gone to any expense on that head, or the King's ever having spent a sixpence for your existence. Oh, consistency and political or other honesty, where must one look for you?" Shortly afterwards, King Leopold came to England himself, and his reception was as cold at Windsor as it was warm at Kensington. "To hear dear Uncle speak on any subject," the Princess wrote in her diary, "is like reading a highly instructive book. His conversation is so enlightened, so clear. He is universally admitted to be one of the first politicians now extant. He speaks so mildly, yet firmly and impartially, about politics. Uncle tells me that Belgium is quite a pattern for its organisation, its industry and prosperity. The finances are in the greatest perfection. Uncle is so beloved and revered by his Belgian subjects that it must be a great compensation for all his extreme trouble." But her other uncle by no means shared her sentiments. He could not, he said, put up with a water drinker, and King Leopold would touch no wine. "What's that you're drinking, sir?" he asked him one day at dinner. "Water, sir." "God damn it, sir," was the rejoinder, "why don't you drink wine? I never allow anybody to drink water at my table." It was clear that before very long there would be a great explosion, and in the hot days of August it came. The Duchess and the Princess had gone down to stay at Windsor for the King's birthday party, and the King himself, who was in London for the day to prorogue Parliament, paid a visit at Kensington Palace in their absence. There he found that the Duchess had just appropriated, against his express orders, a suite of 17 apartments for her own use. He was extremely angry, and when he returned to Windsor, after greeting the Princess with affection, he publicly rebuked the Duchess for what she had done. But this was little to what followed. On the next day was the birthday banquet. There were 100 guests. The Duchess of Kent sat on the King's right hand, and the Princess Victoria opposite. At the end of the dinner, in reply to the toast of the King's health, he rose, and in a long, loud, passionate speech poured out the vials of his wrath